Hey everybody, it's Mark. This is just a quick note to say that in this upcoming episode, we sit down with Alexandra Pasternak-Jackson to talk about Finnish-American relations. This episode was recorded in October 2024, so before the American presidential election. And so if you're wondering why there may be a slight omission on the views of relations between the two countries, that's because of the timing of the recording and the release. Apart from that, Alexandra is incredibly insightful and very passionate about the subject, so we hope you enjoy.
It is all too easy to get caught up in doomsaying and talking about negative things, and negativity sells. I mean, that's what we read about online. It's in our newspapers. We're doing a lot of cool research in this country and producing things that, 10 years ago would have been seen as impossible, and they're happening here. I think Finns adapt really well. I mean, what we've noticed is that the companies where they do send a Finn over are more successful longer term. Also make preparations for crises and worst case scenarios. What I will not allow is for that to hold me or anyone on my team back.
Okay, so we are back again for another episode of the FLT podcast. Thank you for joining us. We've been on the road now for the best part of a year. I think we've had a lot of really good insights and perspectives on Finnish leadership and how they compare both in Finland and internationally. But one of the angles that I wanted to look at with a bit more of a finer tuned lens was how do Finns travel abroad and how do foreigners do when they want to come and set up a business here? And so when I was trying to think about, mixing commerce and this sort of cultural types, one of the first names that sort of jumped off the internet towards me was that of you, Alexandra Pasternak-Jackson. How are you today?
I am doing great, thanks.
Thank you. I'm very glad that you're here. We've prepared, as always, a little bit of an introduction for you.
Fantastic.
Ali, would you do the honors?
Yeah, of course. Welcome, Alexandra. You are the CEO of AmCham Finland and the American Chamber of Commerce and an advisory board member at the FARIA network, the Finnish American Research and Innovation Accelerator. You describe your role as key in helping business executives and companies reach their full potential on both sides of the Atlantic. And you have progressed through the organization from the level of project manager to CEO. As a non-governmental non-profit, AmCham is funded by its members, but when you took the helm in 2018, you led a financial turnaround to stabilize your organization. Originally from Helsinki, you have an American father and Finnish mother. You went to school in the U.S., graduating from the George Washington University in International Affairs and Sociocultural Anthropology, before returning to complete MBA in Communication Management in Finland. You also have studied Russian. As a Finnish American, you commented on a recent article that you have heard it all before on the comparisons between the two nationalities, but that a surprising commonality is the love for the underdog and for long shots. More recently, you have described the Finnish government's plans to reduce foreign workers' job-seeking time to 3 months as devastating and highlighted strong shifting sentiments in young professionals, of which only half are now looking forward to working life, with 45% looking to become entrepreneurs. You describe your passions as reading, dancing, and learning, with your particular penchant for non-fiction, history, and politics. Before heading off to a new general counsel role, Ambassador Jarmo Sareva asked you what you thought Swedes do better than Finns in the US. To which you replied simply, well, for starters, they smile. So is this a fair reflection of you? And did your feedback get Ambassador Sareva smiling?
I think, yes, it is a fair reflection. I'm also the vice chair of the John Morton Center Council. So they do research at the University of Turku on North American studies. But it is absolutely a fair assessment. I'm really passionate about talent, international talent in Finland, which is one of the reasons I post on it quite a lot on LinkedIn. And Jarmo Sarva, the general consul in New York, is a fantastic smiler, and he's doing a lot of good efforts in the U.S. to bring Finland forward there.
Is he smiling more since your feedback?
I would hope so. I think when you look at what's happened between Finland and the U.S. in the last few years, there are many reasons to smile.
He's the only smiling Finn then.
He's the only. We found the only one.
Well, I think the general consul of LA does a pretty good job. Okay, shout out to you.
Is it a good way of smiling or not?
Sneering.
I think,
Exactly.
I think whenever your smile is genuine, you genuinely have reasons to be optimistic and positive and look forward-looking to the future, then it's a genuine good smile.
Okay. I think as well, I mean, we've talked a little bit about sort of the impact that geopolitics had on Finland and, sort of staking its claim in NATO, actually in joining NATO. It sort of changed the approach that most Finns are used to when they communicate at home and abroad. So for many decades, Finnish leaders had to be a little bit guarded and keep their cards close to their chest. I mean, smiling is, I guess, a funny way to try and ask, on the diplomatic scene and on the business scene, are Finnish leaders abroad a little bit more outgoing now, a little bit more outspoken, or is that a change that's going to take some time?
I think anytime you want to evolve a culture, that takes time. But I think one of the things that I've understood is that many of our Finnish leaders have been taken aback by exactly how big of a difference and how much NATO membership has mattered to allied government leaders, and the reception they've had and the privileged conversations that they've been a part of now, and the options also for business have grown, has really shown the difference that NATO membership has made.
I think it's even sort of, you can feel it as a normal Finn living a normal life. I think, listening to the news, listening to the president, listening to the prime minister, I think it's pretty obvious. I mean, there is a clear shift in the tone, which sounds good to me.
Yeah, and not just the tone, but it's also the mindset that we have to have when we consider cooperating with our allies, and the fact that we aren't non-aligned, we are aligned. And thinking on a bigger scale is something that all Finnish decision makers in both public and private settings have to do in order to navigate this new space, but also to seize the opportunities that are present because of this decision that we took as a nation.
What about the new president? There's like a belief that the new president in Finland comes with a big smile. Do you see a difference now with the new president? Because he smiles a bit more than the previous one, I guess.
Well, I think we have been exceptionally fortunate in this country to always have the right president for the right time. When you think...
No, you mean in Finland?
In Finland, yeah. I mean, the Finnish presidents, when you think of what President Niinistö, for example, had to navigate, his brand of focus and consideration and thoughtfulness and diplomacy was exactly what this country needed to get us through these very dramatic disruptions that we've had to face. And now we are in this new era where we are a NATO member. The world looks dramatically different than it did 5 years ago. And so once again, Finland has elected a president that seems very capable of navigating this current geopolitical climate.
That's such a good observation, actually. I mean, if you think about sort of the role reversal, right? So if you were going to pick a president to manage the evolving relationship with the US and membership of NATO, Stubb is, eminently qualified to be that person who can build the relationships and build those dialogues. Probably more so than Niinistö was. But if you're looking for the person who would just definitely make the decision of like, okay, let's just this is the new reality. Let's move forward. That's definitely like a Niinistö decision-making style. I think Stubb is probably a little less decisive, a little bit more collaborative when he wants to make those kinds of decisions. So I'd never thought about it that, yeah, you're right. Like at exactly the right time, we had the right leader in charge.
And, Niinistö was tasked with walking, as Finnish presidents have been before him, but was with walking a tightrope at an extremely difficult time transatlantically as well. And he walked that tightrope very, very well. And the difference is now Stubb doesn't have to walk a tightrope per se. The side we landed on is pretty clear.
Good.
Can you elaborate on the loving the underdog and long shots a bit?
Sure. I think, I've mostly spoken about this anecdotally, but if you look at everything from hockey to Eurovision to some of our smaller company business success stories, it's in Finland when there is less of the pressure to win. When there is this kind of underdog, it's very easy to cheer for the underdog. And then when the underdog wins, there is no greater feeling, I think, in Finland, especially when, you all of a sudden see every single piece of your social media, every WhatsApp message is like, Torille, and everyone's just running there and it's super exciting. And I think in the US, there is that same feeling. If you just look at what kind of sports movies get produced in the US, it's always this love of the underdog and this love of the long shot, and also being willing to take the long shot. And I think that is a special type of courage that you need to have to see, there is a small chance that this will succeed. Maybe we should do it anyway. That, why not us? And I think that that is a commonality that Finns share with the US.
Right. But it kind of comes with lots of kind of it's a hard work, right? To support
of course.
Underdog. Just a couple of days ago, we watched the football game, and it was not a good one. So it does make you happy when your underdog wins, but it happens so rarely that, there's a lot of suffering to get there.
Yeah, it's so interesting because last week I hosted our FDI forum, so Foreign Direct Investment Forum. And I spoke a lot at this forum about rational optimism and why we should be extremely optimistic in Finland, despite the doomsaying. If you look at the economic situation right now, it's not great, but there are many reasons for us to be optimistic. And following this, I'm standing in line waiting to go grab lunch, and someone came up to me and said, Alexandra, there's this Finnish saying, and, pardon if I butcher it now, guys, but I think it's pessimisti ei tule pettymys, like a pessimist never gets disappointed. And I think, and I think, part of rooting for the underdog is if they don't win, you're never disappointed because it was a long shot, but you kind of internally believe they could. What would happen if we made this work? And I think, the power for exponential growth exists in that space in between those two attitudes where it's, we really could take this long shot. And what is the hard work required? What is the knowledge gap or the skill gap that we need to fill to make that happen?
Yeah, it all sounds good. But then, I've seen you once in one of this Finnair flight movies about the happiest country in the world, which was Finland. And you were there like talking about, why this is the happiest country. And so if there's so much suffering to get to this, seldom wins. So how does it kind of fit together with this happiest country in the world? So why do people feel happy here? What do you answer to people who ask you, why Finland is the happiest?
Well, I usually start with it's all in context, right? It's the definition of happiness. I think when Finns think of happiness, when I think of happiness, it's contentness. It's being content. Listen, I've worked in the US, I've worked here, and if something were to happen to me medically or financially, I know my kids would be clothed, they would be safe. I know my team at work would have a support network. There would be people they could turn to. I know that there is no crisis that is so big that we couldn't navigate it with the support network that Finland provides its citizens. And that is that means that the stress of worrying about a major disaster is essentially gone. So then I have the energy and time to focus on other things that matter, whether that's things in my personal life or things in my professional life, or focusing on developing my team or growing my organization. Any of those things, I have more room to focus on things that matter. And then because I can do that, I can see more of the positive impact that myself, the team, the organization, or just my family can have on our broader community. There are many people in the world who spend more of their energy making sure that their kids are eating and that they're not one medical diagnosis away from complete ruin or losing their house. And that sounds quite dramatic, but I don't want to belittle this notion that the basics quality of life that we all take for granted here in Finland is so special, and it enables us to go on long walks in the forest and be happy about it. And so that's why I think that's what I say.
And if you put them together, that support network enables you to take quite many long shots.
Yeah.
Like you can really take like a lot of really risky plays and still know that the support network is there for you.
Yeah. And that's why I think it's actually so interesting, because one of the differences that I usually talk about when it comes to Finnish American decision making at a leadership level is this attitude towards risk taking and how much risk you're able to take as a leader. And I've always thought it was interesting that, in Finland, when you talk about taking a big risk or you're considering one, you usually spend most of your time figuring out how to avoid abject failure. Like, what is the worst case scenario? How do we figure out the worst case scenario? Versus in the US, when you're starting to talk about a big risk, you start with what is the big win? What is the vision for the upside? What will it look like when we succeed? And you spend less time on the failure. And that's not a value judgment. That's just a pattern of behavior that I've observed is, if you're measuring whether or not you should take the risk, Finns have more of a tendency to take a risk if it means avoiding failure, not necessarily if it means winning, versus Americans who will take a risk in order to win.
Which is interesting if I think it in the context of loving the underdog, because loving the underdog is a risk as well.
And none of these terms are absolute, right?
Yes. Of course.
Life exists in that kind of messy gray area in between, which is a leadership challenge in itself.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but it's a bit, I don't want to go too tangential or crazy, but
Go crazy, Mark.
Cognitive behavioral therapy. So the way you build the resistance to a phobia or courage, i.e. the, let's say, willingness to take risks and face the thing that you're afraid of, is actually by incrementally getting more and more familiar with the source of your fear. And I wonder, now that you've mentioned it in these terms, that because Finland has such a reliable and robust support network, the concept of failure in risk-taking is so far away that they never want to fail. Whereas the American equivalent, with all due respect to those in the States, it's quite it's an environment where people fall on hard times, right? Where there is no social cover, right? So when they fail, they absolutely fail. Yeah. And yet in the face of that knowledge, Americans tend to take more risks and tend to be a little bit more sort of outgoing.
Well, the downside of contentness, and I personally don't experience this downside, but, is that when you're comfortable, it's harder to take those risks, and you're not necessarily as hungry for something, to attain something more. And you can look at the statistics of the sizes of our businesses. We have a tendency to have very big companies, and we have a tendency to have very small companies in Finland. And the number of sort of medium-sized companies in Finland is quite low compared to our other European neighbors. And we would really need to grow it. But a lot of smaller companies will say, they're very content doing what they do. They don't necessarily need to explode. They can pay their salaries and they make a good living and they contribute to the economy. And so why go through the hassle of that growth.
Of growth. Yeah.
And so it's quite interesting, because if you look at it broadly, there is that kind of concern, that lack of hunger. But again, my viewpoint is a bit skewed, because I run an organization where members are members because they're hungry, because they want to grow and they want to develop, and they believe in both personal and professional development. And so I have a bit of a bubble around me of these
risk takers.
Yeah. And I would say kind of growth and future oriented leaders. Yeah.
But that's why Sweden has ABBA and Finland doesn't have. Yes, Swiss actually, they have this hunger, at least some of them. But can we now talk a little bit about your kind of leadership approach?
Sure.
So we covered a lot of interesting things, but now how would you describe yourself as a leader, and maybe some kind of your experiences that allowed you to develop your current leadership approach?
Sure. Thank you for the question. I think what encapsulates my leadership approach is iterative improvement and continuous learning. It's really important to me that I'm always staying, both for myself, staying on top of how to be a better leader, but also for my team and the community that I lead, that they have opportunities to grow professionally. My first 100 days as a CEO was very difficult, because I was leading a financial turnaround, but also a cultural turnaround inside the organization. And I remember thinking, okay, if I can get through this being brave and being kind, not being nice, but being kind, then I'll be okay. And I really latched onto those words, and that has really been what I've centered my leadership around. But I strongly believe that culture matters, the culture you have in your organization. I strongly believe that it is a leader's job to set the tone and the psychological safety around that culture, and that also that everyone that you work with are human beings. And that is something, they're not just workers or employees. They have a whole part of their life you don't necessarily see. That can impact their performance, and so their well-being matters as well.
What's the difference between being kind and being nice?
So that phrase, cruel to be kind, is that, sometimes you have to do the thing that isn't nice, or say the thing that no one else wants to say, put the cat on the table, as we say in Finland. And you're not always saying nice things. Sometimes you're saying challenging things. And sometimes that means setting boundaries as well, as, this is my time, or, we are not doing these types of activities in this new world, or these types of behaviors. And in setting those things, you are showing kindness, because you have the foresight and strength to build towards the vision of what your organization is going to be, or how your team is going to be. Versus if you're nice to everyone, then you're just putting a fake smile on your face and being polite all the time.
Right.
And I think kindness really matters, and is a practice that, even though I focus and I'm aware of it, I still need to actively think about, is this the kind thing to do? Is this the right thing to do? And sometimes being kind and nice go together, which that's the best, when you can both be kind and nice at the same time. But it's not always the case.
Right. I think one of the interviewees said, yeah, clarity is kindness.
Clear is kind, something like that. OT,
and
from Solita.
Yeah.
I think clarity is kindness is such a great phrase. And for me, on my personal leadership journey, learning clarity and what clarity is for others is probably the steepest learning curve I had, because I am very comfortable with the unknown, with the uncertainty. I recently actually did one of those. I joined a mentoring program for Diamanten, and they had me do one of these personality tests. And the results of the personality test showed that I'm very comfortable with no framework and no boundaries. And I will put in the framework if it needs it. But not everyone is like that. Yeah. And learning what clarity and being very clear on what your expectations are, what the strategy is, what the situation is, turns out that's also a skill.
Yeah.
And that, for me, developing that type of clarity has been my steepest learning curve as a leader. But I hope my team would say I was there yet. But, it's always like, it's like, it's a journey.
In your LinkedIn profile, it says that you have 50 different skills. I think it's a lot, and most of them are endorsed by different people.
I was going to say, I'm not sure I set those. I think other people have endorsed things,
but
that's
50
what it says.
is a good number.
Yeah.
So my question is, how does it feel to be a superhuman? I think 50 skills is it's a lot. And how do you develop yourself still if there's a need for development as a leader? How do you learn skills number 51, 52, and so on?
I was going to say, I need to go to my LinkedIn profile to read about the skills that I have. I'm touched and I guess honored to have people endorse me for so many things. I think part of it is being willing to say yes and do new things and then figure out how to do them later. And there is a method to the madness of figuring how to do things, because for me, sparring is incredibly important. I am fortunate to have a rich network of executives around me that I can pick up the phone and call, hey, in this situation, what would you do? How would you handle this? And I'm also privileged that they'll do the same with me, as I'm a sounding board for many of our members and obviously also my friends. So sparring is one way, but I also believe in taking formal courses. So, 2 years ago, I went to Harvard Business School to do executive sessions. We actually at AmCham, we run a program with Harvard Business Review Press where we bring Harvard Business Review professors, authors, editors to Finland to do masterclasses with our members. And so for that, I'm constantly reading books and going, oh yeah, we got to bring this guy over. And I want to talk to this one. And Katie Giro on our team, who's my deputy director, runs that program. And so she and I are always sparring back and forth, like, what have you read? What's really good? But then also I have the great fortune of being raised by a management consultant. So my father is actually someone who he's my dad, but I also consider him a mentor. I'll call him and spar things out with him. And he'll often say, you really need to be reading this book or this theory. But it's easy to get excited and passionate, or for me, it's easy to get excited and passionate about things when I have other people around me who are also excited and passionate about something. So I learn best when I'm interacting with others. And so the fact that I run a chamber where I get to interact with others.
Yeah.
And then lastly, I would say, I think we have tremendous psychological safety on our team. And so I'm very glad when the team will occasionally say, Alexandra, I think we should revisit this part of our values, or, they'll really raise issues that we want to work on together. And that then inspires me to work on it with them, but also go down my own learning curve. Like, where did this go on? I really believe in debriefs and kind of reflections quite a lot.
You mentioned earlier that you talk about rational optimism, and our president talks about optimistic realism. Are they the same, or?
I mean, rational optimism is when you are focusing on the facts and insight and the roadmap, the pathway to something that is successful, where you can see the opportunity, and rather than focusing on the noise around you, you focus on where you are heading. And it is also then backed up by expert insight. And I think it is all too easy to get caught up in doomsaying and talking about negative things, and negativity sells. I mean, that's what we read about online. It's in our newspapers. And sometimes facts are just negative. Sometimes it's just bad news. When the Bank of Finland came out and said our economy is going to contract by 0.5% in 2024, at the same time as VAT is going up, at the same time as there's still inflationary pressures, there's still a war in Europe, the list goes on and on and on. It's really easy to get into a negativity spiral. And then when you come out and you start speaking positively, people will often call you naive.
Yeah.
Or think naivete and she's not aware of what's going on. No, rational optimism is about being fully aware of the situation, then looking at the signals that exist and the insights that exist so that you can manage your risk as a leader properly, and then going after the opportunity and believing and knowing, because you've prepared for it, you've done the hard work, that you will get there, you will succeed. And that's where we are as a country today for Finland. You know, there is a lot of doomsaying, but I really believe, based on the insight from experts in our community, what our leaders are saying, the plans I've been privileged to see, that we have many opportunities for growth, economic growth, but also country brand growth and success. And if we just focus on those, we can be rationally optimistic together.
Okay, thanks.
I think that must be a hard sell for a lot of Finns. I mean,
yes, absolutely.
We talked at the start when we talked about like the NATO kind of effect in the changing way that Finns kind of need to do business. I get this now also when I talk to senior leaders at the minute. You know, they have a dire outlook and they're pessimistic. And then you ask them, well, how does that really affect or translate to your kind of day-to-day, your opportunities, your growth? And they're like, well, you know, money's more expensive. And then you're like, it's more expensive for everybody.
Yeah.
So where's the thing? And they can't actually practically point to an area in their business or in their operations where there's a direct impact. And so you think, well, why? You know, why are we so pessimistic? And then I think it usually kind of reverts to a cultural, well, you don't understand Finns. And,
well, and so why does it matter? Why does optimism matter? I think because why can't we just be happy being pessimist realists? But we are human beings. We are programmed that if we are inspired by our purpose or we believe we can have positive impact, we will push a little harder. We will feel more satisfaction in our life. Our personal well-being will increase. When personal well-being increases, you are more likely to smile, going back to that, smile at others who are more likely to smile back. And you kind of, it is a bit cliche, but it is that throwing the pebble in the water ripple effect that does happen. Success begets success. And I think one of the key things that have happened is people are more and more comfortable talking about their successes. And when I say people, I'm speaking specifically about the business executives that I'm working with, is they're more comfortable talking about their successes, which they weren't necessarily 20 years ago. It was sort of like, we succeeded, but let's keep it quiet just in case something goes wrong. Yeah. But now it's like, we succeeded. Here's how we did it. We host an event called Making It in America. This year it's on October 24th, but I think this podcast comes out after. But we host an event every year called Making It in America, where these CEOs will share what they did to be successful in the US. And this kind of best practice sharing is really, really key.
Well, I mean, yeah, not just best practice. I mean, positivity itself. Like if you want to partner, like if you want to go particularly with American companies, it's super hard to say, well, I'm not really confident about the future, but you should do business together. You know what I mean? That is a tough sell for anybody. Yeah. Right. So.
Yeah. And it's for me, it's like when people bring that kind of negativity, and I'm in the nice thing for me to do is just kind of nod my head and go, yeah, the situation is difficult. It is. I'm hearing that too. It's really difficult. The kind thing for me to do is to talk about why we should focus more, bring more of our energy on where those opportunities are, and just sort of the situation that exists financially is the situation that exists. It doesn't mean we can't succeed.
Yeah.
And the more you speak in those terms, the more likely you are to help someone be better and, sort of be on their path to success.
Yeah, I like the title of this event that you have, Making It Great Again in America.
That is not the title. It's just Making It in America.
Making It in America.
But actually, I have a question. So one thing that came out from this podcast is that there are not that many Finnish business leaders outside of Finland. And then, as I understand, the purpose or the aim of MCHAM is exactly to put kind of Finland on the map in US, right? So how do you do that? So how do you actually put Finnish business and Finland on the map somewhere in Washington?
So our job is to help Finnish companies enter and expand in the US market, as well as to secure long-term transatlantic commercial ties. And on top of that, we help American and international companies. Amcham actually has 14 different nationalities, companies headquartered in 14 different countries, succeed in Finland, right? And so on a practical level, it is about taking some of that risk and some of that fear out of the U.S. entry equation. To that end, we have a program called Launchpad USA. The director, Mike Kleisico, has been doing this work for almost 10 years now, where he's been working with Finnish companies, following an AmCham roadmap, getting them into the U.S. market. And, sometimes it is about being able to answer the questions that people are concerned to ask. It is a big market. You have to start with the decision of where, what exactly do you want to achieve there? Then where are you going? Because location really matters. And then on a practical side, everything from, how do you fill in your IRS paperwork to how do you hire your first U.S. employee? And what are the expectations of your U.S. employee? And are you trying to send your Finnish manager to be head of, the managing director of America? And what's that experience going to be like? So walking a company through that is something that we work well with. And it's nice because all of the ecosystem in the US for Team Finland, we're all pulling together. We're all on this kind of journey to make sure that Finland is more widely known and Americans want to partner with Finland.
On that last case, so with the Finnish manager heading over to the States to run operations, what are your experiences about how well Finns adapt to leading stateside?
I think Finns adapt really well. I mean, what we've noticed is that the companies where they do send a Finn over, at the very least, to set up the business and to kind of do the initial onboarding and to get everything rolling, are, and now massive generalization, guys, but are more successful longer term than the ones who try to run the business just from Finland and hire someone remotely and run the whole thing remotely. And in the U.S., presence matters. And I actually also think, going back to my leadership philosophy, I also think being present matters, physical presence, because familiarity breeds trust, which breeds commerce, really, as you think about it.
Yeah.
But it also breeds camaraderie. And there's a difference between teams and high-performing teams. And high-performing teams are the ones that, really have that camaraderie and want the others to succeed on that team. And it's a very difficult thing to create in the beginning if you aren't there in the U.S. yourself. You who is so passionate about your product or your service, being physically there, breeding that familiarity, then you can move back to Finland. After a time. Some don't want to, but that is an important part of that element.
Yeah.
Are there any specific states in the US where Finns thrive, like California or Oregon or something? Are the warmer states or colder ones?
Well, what's been so interesting to see over the last few years is how many different state delegations have come to Finland because they're interested in getting Finnish business over to their states. And I would say, when I started working in transatlantic relations, it was very much New York, California. And New York and California still have their charm. They still attract Finnish business. But now you can really see companies heading, to many, many different states. Texas is a popular one. Illinois is a popular one. The delegation from North Carolina is coming here, and we've had some of our members have success in North Carolina. So the landscape for that is changing, and you really want to consider, if you have a physical good, what your distribution centers look like. Where America is huge. How are you going to get things around? Where are your customers? Can you have remote workers or not? Because you'll save a lot of money if you're hiring in rural areas. So there are many considerations to that question, but I think it's more than just an East-West Coast game now.
In your interactions with American people and companies, so what kind of stereotypes do they have about Finland?
That's a great question. I think still many Americans haven't heard of Finland. So we still have an opportunity as a country to positively influence the stereotype of how people experience Finns. I think if you speak with people who have done business with Finns, you will get a lot of compliments, because there is an emphasis on effectiveness, on order, on being on time, delivering, doing, setting an expectation and then delivering on it. These are all very positive things. I think Sanna Marin did a wonderful job giving Finland some glamour. And that was very much needed in the US. But there are many areas where Finland is very well known right now. So areas of emerging technology, everything from 5, 6G, future G, quantum, AI, nanotechnology, advanced medical devices, advanced manufacturing, space. I mean, we're doing a lot of cool research in this country and producing things that, 10 years ago would have been seen as impossible, and they're happening here. And so if we can build a stereotype of Finns as this like forward-looking, emerging, doing, making possible the impossible, or making possible the theoretical, probably is more appealing to Finns, is something that we could build together. Yeah,
making possible impossible. One thing that, I did some research on actually international business, foreign companies here in Finland, and then like doing business with Finns. And one of the common stereotypes that I came across was that Finns were really slow in decision making, in how they do business and things like that. Is that common in your circles as well?
Yes. Well, I mean, we take a lot of vacation, don't we? It's anyone who's tried to reach anyone in this country in July will be like, do people not like business? What is happening? Why is no one answering their phone? And so I think that is a stereotype that is quite warranted because, Finns, and again, this is broad generalizations, but respecting working hours and work-life balance is incredibly important to the Finnish way of life, which means there's no one answering emails at 7, 8 p.m. unless you're an entrepreneur with a stake in your business. And that's incredibly important. But I think there is sort of you have to wait. A lot can happen in the US in 24 hours. But in Finland, only 8 hours of things can happen in 24 hours.
That's true. And it's not just international business. I know many cafes and restaurants that do not open in July, much to my chagrin. So I could do a lot more. I could give a lot more Finnish businesses my money.
Well, one of the things I do quite often is I give talks on networking in the US and how to build a stronger network and how to follow up in the US. And it's always I speak to students quite a lot. They're my favorite cohort to talk to. But everyone always seems quite shocked when I'm like, when you get a business card or an introduction, it's like 12 hours until you follow up with them. Like it used to be 24, but now I say 12 because if I say 12, they'll do it within 24.
Yeah.
It's like you need to, at the latest, the next day, be emailing, LinkedIn connecting, texting this person, because I've sat on the sidelines of various kind of trade or business missions to the US where people will come back from the US with a bunch of business cards and take weeks because they had other things going on, take weeks to follow up with them. And the Americans have forgotten.
Yeah.
Because,
the opportunities moved on, or then you've even forgotten who is this? This is That's interesting one.
So now thinking about if you meet an American person who says Finland, what is it? So what would you tell this person? Like, why should American companies and Americans do business with Finnish companies and in Finland?
I would say Finland is a fantastic place for you to invest and grow your company. Not only are we at the forefront of new technologies, but we have one of the per capita most highly educated populations in the world. You will have the type of talent here who will deliver for you in the way you want it in English as well, because Finns are terrifically multilingual. And you have political stability. And depending on your industry, it's important, you have a stable electricity grid. There are a lot of investments we've received in clean energy, in data centers that require good electricity. We have it. We have the land for those types of investments. But we also have a burgeoning willingness to work with international CEOs to get their investment here. And that's something that AmCham's working on all the time, is liaising with the government to make sure that they understand how valuable international investment is to Finland. And you want to be in one of these countries. You want to be investing in a country that wants to work with you. And that's why you should invest here. I will say, for your listeners who may not know this, international investors, foreign affiliates, are only 1% of the companies in Finland, but represent 39% of all of our exports. I think it's 27, or it could be 29% of all of our R&D. I don't have my notes in front of me. It's 308,800 jobs. That's grown in 2 years by 30,000 jobs that foreign affiliates have invested in Finland. And what I like to say is, imagine if we could grow that. Imagine if we could double that. Imagine if foreign affiliates were 2% of our businesses, or even 1.2%. Think of the implications. We would solve our unemployment problem just by being welcoming to international investment. And what international investment needs, and now we're going full circle, because what international investment needs, they need to know that they're going to have the talent pool to make the high quality research and development investments, and to make the high quality investments they need to know that there's going to be enough talent here. And that's one of the reasons why, in the introduction, I post a lot about talent, because it is incredibly important that we have strong local talent pipelines. Universities are working with the private sector to develop the skill sets that we need, as well as welcoming international experts and talent to Finland. We need talent at all levels here.
It's, I'm going to just head back to we talked earlier about sort of pessimism and the pessimism in the market. And we talked about making international trade, right? And how it's very difficult to do business with somebody who's pessimistic. Makes me kind of like, not mad, but it's a massive opportunity now, right? And that, with the reputation Finland has, with its changing position in the evolving geopolitics, and with its kind of background in, like you said, skills, its support network, its focus areas in like high tech and 5G, and I think we even do synthetic food production and a bunch of other like future-based technologies. Being pessimistic now is crazy. You're like throwing away an advantage that we have over most other countries in the world.
I agree completely.
Like, this is okay. Good. Well then, maybe on that note, is there any advice that you can give to leaders in Finland or businesses or investors in the US that might be concerned or overly concerned about the economic conditions?
So, most leaders are very familiar with risk management and with scenario planning, and at looking at, what they need to know. And there is work that we need to do as a country to make sure that we are more welcoming to international investment in general, that we are a more attractive place to do business, a more globally competitive place. But what I can tell you about working with Finns is that you will find an incredibly resilient people. So if you can come here and bring a win-win, then you won't find another group of people that are as dedicated to making something work. And that's one of the reasons why we have all of these emerging technologies, because we have these brilliant people who are like, we're going to figure out how to make this work. And then they actually do.
Engineering mindset. You have a problem, you fix it.
But I'm truly impressed with your level of optimism. I don't know if there's any Finnish people like having the same level of optimism.
One of the things I would like to say also is that, referring what you said, it might be difficult for a lot of people listening to this podcast, because I am so optimistic. And I do tend to see the glass as half full, and I do tend to have a bias towards positivity. That is my bias. My bias is towards seeing the positive side of that, which is really uncomfortable if you make the assumption that I don't see the other things. Because that is often what I encounter is people who think that because I choose to see the positive, I ignore all the other. I do not ignore all the other things. I also make preparations for crises and worst case scenarios, and to prepare the organization, the team, my family for anything that might happen. That is always there. What I will not allow is for that to hold me or anyone on my team back. We cannot be making decisions out of fear, and that is too often what happens when you focus on the negativity. And when you focus on the positivity, you are more likely to go for the win, to go for the long shot, to go for the thing that, felt a little bit impossible a few years ago, but now is possible. And so, I tend to err on that side. And I understand for listeners if that's hard, but I'm not unaware of the other side, and I will debate the other side, and I will come up with horrible scenarios for my board. Actually, funnily enough, one of the events we host annually, which started as a joke, is worst case scenario planning and building your resilience as a leader. It's my Halloween event. And I say mine because everyone, when I started telling them about this, was like, don't do this, Alexandra. We have enough bad news. But I wanted to take a gallows humor look at, let's talk about the worst case scenario. So for this event, I invite political experts, economic experts to come in, and I tell them, everyone's planning their scenarios for their boards, for their strategies that give us the worst one you can think of. And then together we'll figure out how to solve it. And there is a strange sense of empowerment that comes from just putting that worst case, literally nuclear war. I remember for the first one we did, Aki Kangasharju from Etla was our economic speaker, and Minna Olander from the Finnish Institute for International Affairs was our political speaker, and I said, listen, if there is not a mushroom cloud it's not dark enough. And it was funny because both of them did such an excellent job, and some of their predictions indeed came true in the scenarios they had walked us through. But what the audience in the feedback form afterwards said was, make it darker, make it worse.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're doing now.
But I mean, that's actually something that any leader listening to this can do for themselves, because it's something we very rarely do, which is make that worst case scenario real to you.
Yeah.
Because we talked about, before, the closer you can get to failure, the more comfortable you'll end up being with risk taking.
Yes.
Right. So the less comfortable you are, the more comfortable you will be with risk. Everybody can go back to their drawing board, look at their next year, draw out their worst case scenario and go, okay, I can probably solve that.
Yeah.
If it comes to this, I know what to do. That'll probably give people a lot more energy and preparation to make a change.
Yes. And I often find that on any big decision you have to make, if you ask, what's the worst that can happen? And people, if you're advising them or sparring with them, really hate it when you say that. What's the worst that could happen? Yeah. Because in their head, their head explodes with everything that could. But when you really look into it, some of that is your own emotional regulation. It's like, I will feel embarrassment, or I will feel shame, or people will think I did a bad job as a leader. I made the wrong strategic call. I cost people their jobs. We didn't hit our goals because of a decision I made. And I think a really important part of that leadership learning curve is learning how to regulate those fears that come up, those negative, and, not necessarily negative, because fear can be healthy too.
Yeah.
But, is learning to make sure that your decision isn't being made because you're worried about being embarrassed, or you're worried about a sense of shame if it doesn't go right. If you're worried about that, go back and look at your reasons. Go back and look at, what is the case that you build? And if for some people it's very comforting to look at those, okay, if this worst case happens, this is what we're going to do about it. But it should never be something that holds you back. And that's really what I want our members at AmCham, but my team is we err on the side of this positivity bias so that the negative things don't hold us back from making decisions.
Okay. Alexandra, first off, thank you for your time today.
You're welcome.
For those only listening, it's been a hot box today in this room, and some of us lost our mind.
It's a sauna experience.
It's a authentic sauna experience. But I feel like we've done actually quite a lot of like myth busting today, right? Like we've actually talked through like your approach for sort of rational optimism. It makes a lot of sense. It's also a good methodology for Finnish leaders who may be concerned or overly pessimistic to take a move forward. So thank you for sharing your rational optimism and your methods with us. I feel more optimistic about the future now.
Oh, I'm glad to hear it. You're very welcome.
Awesome. And to you guys, Annalie and Alexei, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you both. Yeah, thanks.